Say no. Hey, Bob. Can you hear me on the Teams meeting? Yeah. It says I have the pop-up says I'm muted, but I'm totally not. Test 1, 2. Test. Can you hear me? Hello. Test 1, 2. Test. Hello. Can you hear me? Oh, cool. I'm just gonna ignore that. Can I get that off my screen at least? It's like frozen on my screen. Awesome. All right, I got rid of it at least. Oh. Back. Why? Just really loves that pop-up. I don't understand. Oh well. Don't think I have any content in the top middle of my screen, but if we do, we can blame Microsoft. Yeah, what's up? Which models? Hopefully. Which framework? I haven't been convinced yet. I think the biggest thing we'll talk about is just like getting it out there and seeing what problems you're actually solving. We have a lot of people at my company that we talk to that are like, hey, we have one use case of chatting with our data. We don't necessarily want to hire a consultant to come in and charge us an obscene amount of money. Like, so what I'm going to do is show you kind of some off-the-shelf stuff you can do. Talk about that. I recently tried to get into AutoGen. I don't know if you've played with that one at all. So have you heard of link chain and semantic kernel? So the idea with link chain and semantic kernel is you have like a singular agent. AutoGen tries to take the next step of being an agent orchestrator. So you can have basically agents that can talk to each other, or you can have agents that, you know, follow in a line of path. So maybe there's, you know, customer service agent that then bleeds out to these three other agents, and then a summary agent that then goes back to customer service, or you can start building out weird orchestrations like that. Tried to do that, but it didn't work in the latest .NET for whatever reason. I opened up a ticket with Microsoft, and seems like one line of their sample is wrong that they're updating, but that's been my latest thing is I wanted to do that because I've heard.
So is this what major?
Yeah, so if you do autogen, you can have multiple agents doing multiple tasks. So you could even say like, if there's like a customer service, like maybe you have an agent that like responds back to the person, says like, sorry about your issue. You could have one that dispatches a service request. You could have another one to see like, am I seeing a spike in requests and maybe I need to notify a team. You can kind of have that orchestration to branch out. And that's where you can start getting those autonomous agents too into there of going to operate, maybe not on your behalf for simpler tasks, but.
I'm frustrated.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you could do, depending on what the computation is, you could do that with one agent or multiple. It also depends if you want to do like multiple experiments, you could have multiple agents potentially too. Of,
I think. Oh. Okay.
Mhm.
Right. So 70B model fairly be dead now.
Mhm.
The throughput of the code is just not quite what I wanted.
Yeah,
This is their, that's what they're, for the period of time. So I agree.
I use a lot of the Azure stuff just because then you get more of the higher end throughput. The downside is you're paying as you use it. So if you really start hammering that throughput, you know, can start hitting token maximums and getting paid or charged for that, which is not always fun. But I'm good if you are.
You can find this need to have this multi-platform systems. The same including we have different things. That's what is on the side of the and I really appreciate the drawing for that's the code. Yeah, like I said, use Microsoft is I guess with the page also goals with the and before I hand it over to the progress presentation. And you want to talk about fixes?
Uses, Johnson, I'm actually a specializer for GCP. Yes. Sit right here, next to upstairs. You're not familiar with systems, we're IT services company. So staffing is one of our arms. Number of users that occupation or foreign positions or trying to look at where you're at, I'm just here's a resource, curious what's out there, either locally or I can recruit cloud technology nationally as well. Right now is the crazy uptake. It's 3 or 4 weeks. So always here as a resource to you. Hopefully the market's starting to pick up. We've seen an uptake nationally. So even if you aren't curious about new roles, will come with salaries, resumes, even just letting you know trends. So not just training. I was hearing more. Thank you.
That has been a great sponsor for our user with we have loved this event, and I hope that this so pretty much. It's a great space. It's not to be get that is up. But like it's a big. So with that, what do you think?
Thank you. So I'm Alec Harrison. I think Bob gave me a little too much credit when he says help co-run the place. I think one time in the whole year, Bob couldn't make it to a meeting, so I showed up in his place. Otherwise, he's pretty much locked the whole thing down. He keeps it running. So thanks for him for running this. It's a lot of work running a user group, and it's a lot of fun to be able to talk to people. For this one, we've had a lot of conversations where I'm at of companies who are wanting to get into AI. You know, Microsoft keeps pushing all the new AI tools, trends, all that sort of stuff. And it's really having IT organizations ask, like, what do we need AI for? What are we trying to do? Does this new tool, you know, if you listen to the marketing material, it's going to cure every disease and we're going to be filthy rich. And then you hear the naysayers saying, like, you're just going to waste your time and blow a bunch of money. Where's AI exist now? So I kind of built this to be very high level overlay of a bunch of different things. There's no strict agenda. So if you want to move faster, move slower, talk about something, feel free to raise your hand, shout it out, do whatever. And then we'll just kind of go with the flow from there. So who am I? My picture is the only thing apparently in the top middle of the screen. Like I said, I'm a software consultant at a company called Lean Techniques. We're based out of Des Moines, Iowa. That QR code leads to my newsletter. If you're curious, I used to plug all the stuff I did, but I started building out a centralized place for that. So about once a week, I'll send a summary of all that. And then I also have a guest spot. So I'll publish other people I'm following in the industry. So if you want to learn about what others are doing or maybe other trends that other people are seeing, feel free to follow that. Also do a podcast in there, and I have a goal for 25 of blogging once a week. So you'll see that all in there as well too. So just some background before we get going. Yeah. No, it just won't come off my screen. I don't know why. So at a high level, we'll talk about RAG. If you haven't heard of it before, we'll define what that is, the significance in NLP or natural language processing, talk about some practical use cases, some implementation strategies, and then we'll start doing a little high-level overview of all the different options we have out there today, from some no code to some higher-level code to just being able to get some application out and going. So understanding RAG. RAG is kind of a hybrid approach with generative models. So you have your off-the-shelf pre-trained LLMs. Those are your GPTs, your Geminis, your Olamas, all those things. They're trained on general information, right? It's really great as basically being like an advanced Google search is how I would describe it. You can ask it a question, no matter if it's short, long, rambly, and it does its best to answer it for you. Where it kind of falls flat is being your organizational information, right? Like when Google built Gemini, they didn't have a probe in your company scanning all your files and documents, hopefully. If they did, you might need to get different cybersecurity people. But so that means if you ask it general questions like what's the weather, what are trends on bigger things, maybe they'll see that. But if you ask it, hey, what did my boss send me 2 days ago? And can you summarize that? You'll be like, I have no idea. A lot of those models are also dated. So I think it was GPT 01 was last updated in like data from 23, maybe 22. So all these models, when they get published out to us, they have a cutoff date of the training window. So you might be able to ask it questions of things that happened prior to that on the internet. But if there's any big world event, all that sort of stuff, you're kind of stuck there. And then there's also other things where people try to feed the model misinformation on purpose just because it's funny to say like 2 + 2 equals fish. So you can use your own knowledge base for that. That's kind of where RAG steps in is let's take our data we have on-prem in our data centers, in our Azure, you know, dispersed everywhere and start using that to get model information back out. So we have our external knowledge sources that would be external to the models themselves or external to our company. We can do document retrieval. That's where we can go out and fetch different documents to say, all right, you're asking about HR information. Let's get the HR knowledge base in there. We can start summarizing data. You can potentially ask about financial reporting, things like that. One cool thing we've done before too is like doing a fake survey and asking trends about the survey results, right? Because at the end of the year, a lot of companies like to ask, how are you feeling about your job? And you can then start pulling trends out of that right away. So you don't have to wait for somebody to write an Excel macro or do any sort of crazy data transformation. You could just load it into an AI model and it could tell you all that immediately. And then coherent and grounded output, that just means it's grounded on your data. So again, if you're a professional company, maybe you have different ways to talk about different things. So I was talking to a buddy of mine today, and I was talking about a CSM at our company. Like we call them customer success managers. He thought I was talking CSM as a certified Scrum Master. And that's where anchoring on your data could potentially help. Because then it's like, okay, well, in your organization, that acronym applies to this phrase instead of just like, here's a generic one. Here's 5 different things it could be. If you ask me, what does a CSM do? And I'm a general knowledge model, I'm going to guess, put a finger in the wind, and hopefully it's the one you want. But again, all this is math and statistics, so it could very well not be. And then the more you have common crossovers of data, the more likely it's not what you want. The key benefits are the improved factual accuracy. So again, if it's grounded on my data, my company, if asked what a CSM is, for me in my state of definition, that's going to be a customer success manager. If it was my buddy and grounded in his data, that'd be a certified Scrum Master. The enhanced context relevance, again, we're going to be looking primarily at data that applies to our organization. We're not going to be looking at, I don't know, something completely off the wall like different titles for different companies that aren't even relevant, things maybe in completely different industries. Those are things that we're just not even going to bother ourselves with. We'll have a broader range of queries, so we'll be able to span wider with a LLM that's trained on external data first, so we can ground it on our data, but then we also have the asking it about stuff that's outside of our walls as well. And then mitigating common issues like hallucinations and relevance. We'll talk about that a little bit. The next concept is like a vector database. So you have your data, you have your model. What do I do with it? You'll have to do get a vector database. You'll have to do something called chunking, which is essentially using an embedding model. And an embedding model will leverage semantic similarities to improve the accuracy of document retrieval. That's a fancy way of saying it's going to start chopping up if you have, for example, PDFs, any of that. You can pick a chunk size, typically 10. Oh, I'm going to blank on that. 1058, I believe, is the normal chunk. And what that does is it starts building out a context window. So if you think about it, when you turn a page on a book, you know what was happened in the page before, you know what happens on the page next. Where chunking helps, we have context windows that kind of overlap those pages. So when you ask a question of a model, if it says like the exact answer of what you're looking at on page 49, or the exact phrase or one of the words, and maybe the definition's on page 50, it's going to have some overlapping context window when you chunk it to say, all right, I know it started on 49 but went to 50. So you have some of that information for you, so that way it's not like the model's looking at a book. I'm on this page, I don't know what to do. And then we're going to process the documents. It'll start creating coherent responses, and then using LLMs, like I said, GPT and other fine-tuning models based on your information. Different models we've talked about are that we could use is a customer support one, information retrieval assistant, education tool, and critical information scenarios. I've seen people use them to start doing trend seeking on production apps. So, you start seeing a trend of maybe 400 errors going out or 500 errors. Maybe there's a certain point or threshold that bot can then take an action and reach out to people, and then could look at other past responses and start trying to aggregate, saying like, oh, hey, looks like at this time we had this outage last week. Here's how we resolved it. Maybe we need to go look at that again. Customer support, Also, same thing we talked about at the start of this AutoGen, where you can start doing potentially multi-agent orchestration. So you can have your front of the line chat bot that just basically is nice to the customer, asks them what happened, and then you can have stuff in the back end that looks like maybe at your company's internal database of like tickets of what's going on. You could have, maybe there's proactive actions you could do. So in the world of cloud, it could go restart an app service. So you don't have to have somebody go physically kick a server if you don't want to. And then you could do some other things too. So there's some other proactive things there. Skip that one. And then there's a few different ways we can do it. The integration of components and generative model training. You can fine tune them if you need more less latency and get them to move quicker. Downside with a lot of that is you're going to be paying more potentially for the model. So that was a very high level overview. I think the next thing is if you want to start chatting with your data, the simplest turnkey solution, if you don't want to build anything and you just kind of want to pay somebody, but don't necessarily want to pay a consultant, is paying Microsoft, right? That's the easiest thing to do. They have a tool called, used to be called Bing Chat Enterprise. Now it's somewhere in between Copilot and Microsoft 365 Copilot. They keep changing the name. But it used to be called Bing Chat Enterprise. And what that is basically a Copilot that can be indexed on all your SharePoint documents. So what that is it's a $30 per month per seat license that can just say, hey, I'm going to look at your SharePoint. The nice part about that as well is if you have very good SharePoint authorization and authentication, is it actually uses that when you ask the model a question. So your data security and data privacy, all that stuff's kind of already solved for you, assuming you have good SharePoint rules. One thing it's really great at is exposing that maybe you don't have so great SharePoint rules. But then you can ask questions like, what did my boss tell me 2 days ago? How am I going to draft an email for me? Maybe I remember this phrase in this document I wrote or this contract. Can you go find me the one that had this phrase in it? And it can span all of your 365 products. So that includes Teams, includes PowerPoint, Word, all that fun stuff. So that way you can just search your documents better. You can even ask like, for example, like what was my relation with this person? Or like when have I interacted with this person, and give me a summary. So if like somebody at work reaches out to you, maybe they're in a different department, haven't talked to them very much, you can do all that stuff too. It's a nice tool. The downside is it's not super customizable. Again, since it's just SaaS software, you're going to be getting what you get. I've heard Microsoft even admit that the SharePoint search is a work in progress. They're getting better at it. So that's one option. The other option, so that's completely buying it from Microsoft. The completely other side is building your own model, training it from the ground up, or fine-tuning it, starting with an LLM, doing like a llama approach where you use like a Pinecone database or something that you're going to manage on your server, on your racks, do that all yourself. The downside with that one is you're going to have data. You're probably going to have to hire a data scientist or have somebody similar in that field. That's going to be costly, especially with, a lot of the AI companies and startups. I think I get a DM on LinkedIn every day of, hey, check out this new AI startup that does something that Microsoft's tools already kind of do, but we'll do it for you for $30 a month. And they're like, I don't know what that really gets me, guys. But so that is definitely a role that's super in demand. Could be hard to find. Also, if your company doesn't really want to be in the data science field, that can also sometimes be a hard sell, right? Of, hey, we're going to have physical racks. We're going to be doing all this. And they're like, well, we just talked to Microsoft or we talked to Amazon and everybody's saying the future is the cloud. Why you're now going to have to propose that I need physical hardware to go do this? So that's sometimes a hard sell. I think the rest of the presentation we'll talk about kind of that middle ground of the balance of off the shelf with Microsoft, but also being able to customize it to your own specific needs. And with that, I'm going to show off. This is one of the biggest samples I tell people who aren't afraid to get a little bit dirty in code. It is the Azure samples for the Azure Search OpenAI demo. I'll show you how easy it is to set this up. The only thing is your data is slightly exposed for a half minute or two. So don't use anything super proprietary, but if you're okay with it, you can always just put Entra, turn on easy off, and do that. But what that does is, how did my session expire? Oh, and I was going to show you also, if you want to play with Copilot, there is a free one. It used to be called Bing Chat. Now it's at copilot.microsoft.com. This is it for just normal users. So it looks a very different experience, but you can ask it questions like, make me a picture of a cat. And it does goofy things like that. And you can tell it to think deeper, which is just basically it puts it back to the LLM and tries to do it a more contextual search. And we got a cat. You can do goofy things like that or research different stuff. With that, we'll go ahead and roll into here. Where did my URL go? I must have closed out of it. Maybe? No, that's not what I wanted. Yes. All right. So what this does is it sets up a simple application. We'll just walk through kind of what it does. Oh, that's why I give me the Azure logo. So behind the scenes, what this is Microsoft built a sample application that goes through fake health insurance information, fake company information like a performance review, and then fake job titles. They're all stored in there. We'll talk about how you get your own data in there in a second. But I can ask it something like, what's included in my health insurance plan that is not standard? Oh, shoot. Well, that's fun. You might just have to take my word that it. Interesting. Okay. Well, let's try that. So if that works as it should, because live demos are always fun. I missed it. What that does is it starts giving you information like this of, does it cover eye plans, says yes or no. So it'll generate, does it think it covers it or not? It can then give you citations. So one thing we've seen this powerful in is using it for potentially trying to find different manuals and going through and trying to help support technicians in different areas and different companies. Because then you can say, hey, here's what my support ticket is. And they can say, oh yeah, here's how you fix it, try to generate it. And then if you don't trust the AI model, we then have citation to documentation that says, here, go read more if you don't trust what is said. There's also other things you can play with. For example, like follow-up questions. That's what's showing off down here. So you might ask it, hearing two, it's going to try to predict what it thinks the next question you should ask is. I haven't seen much use of that personally, because it's usually somebody comes to you with a question, you just give them the resolution. They don't typically really want the follow-up. That might be different in different industries, but if they really want to follow up, they typically usually want to look at the cited material. And then you can play with the different temperature, the seed, the minimum search score, all that sort of stuff. So you can kind of exclude different categories, do different search types. So when this does work, the steps to set it up, and this is where you might have to do a little bit of Azure debugging, but it's literally just, it shows 2 steps. It's really 3. So you have to do AZD auth login. So that just authenticates your local CLI with Azure. AZD and env new, that sets up a new Azure environment in your Azure developer CLI tool. And then AZD up, if you're doing the first time. Let's see if it fixed itself. It did not. Cool. I'll have to look into that. But usually it does work just fine. And then you can start asking questions about your data. And the cool part is all you really need to do is throw your data into the data folder here. And then it can respond as if it just parsed your whole company data. So behind the scenes, what it does is it does that text chunking we talked about with a Python script. It then will use, it also uses, I believe, Azure Form Recognizer. So between those two things, it can parse your PDFs, parse your different documents, say, okay, here's the textual content, start splitting it up into different pieces, shoving that into an Azure AI search index. It doesn't look like, it doesn't actually look like it was quite done, maybe? Anyway, so it does all that pieces for you. What can be kind of scary about this solution, if you're trying to get into this for the first time, we can look at what they do is the front end thing's a container. I believe there's a back end container. We're deploying all those to Azure, an Azure container instance for both of those. The orchestration of this project gets kind of crazy. So what I would say, my first recommendation for this would be is if you're truly just trying to see if chat with your data is worth it, or if anybody uses it, if you can get any sort of actionable insight from your data, it's a good place to start. I don't know if I'd necessarily take this solution. Yeah, it's still not going to work. Cool. Take this solution, build off of it forever. Yeah, go ahead.
So you said.
So this solution right here is just if you wanted to build your own. So there is Azure security. Yeah, so I have this fun thing with my key where sometimes the O double clicks. It just started a couple weeks ago, I think. It's I have a 2015 MacBook, and I think it's about getting there. I also have the butterfly keys, which they've already replaced once for free under warranty, which is not like Apple. So right here is the big high-level statements for all of this. A lot of these are explained even further in terms that are above me, because I'm not a security guy, but they do go down all the specific security stuff. But the highlights are your data is not available to other customers. Your data is not available to OpenAI, so it won't go back into the model. It's not used to improve OpenAI. Not used to train, retrain, or improve Azure AI services. Not used to train any Microsoft third-party products. And then your fine-tuned models, if you go down that path, are just fine-tuned for you. Nobody else can use them.
So is there like stop? There.
There's not a long-term memory, but so all of it is in Azure. Show you. Let's jump in. See if this actually set up correctly. That might have been the issue. So if you notice, I was in the Azure portal. All of this stuff is in Azure AI Foundry, which is their new rebranding of AI Studio, which is a continuation of Azure Open AI, which used to be just GPT models. So, I'm sorry. Oh, so they all sit there. They stay in your Azure tenant. The models themselves, if you don't fine tune, are pay as you go. So you pay with tokens. So Azure OpenAI token costs. So if you don't use the models, don't do anything, they're basically free. So Microsoft won't charge you anything. They'll just leave them there. Here's roughly what they cost right now. They've changed the pricing to 1 million tokens. So simple queries are like 200-ish tokens. They used to have the math in the thousands of tokens because it used to cost a lot more. And then they started getting like 4 decimal places, a penny, like that would have been 1,000th of a penny per 1,000 tokens or something crazy that like didn't make sense. So they've switched it to a million tokens costs now, but these are all the different ones. So like, for example, O1 mini for 1 million tokens is $3.30. So starts to get cheaper. For your memory, the other thing you would use is an Azure AI search index. That used to be Azure Cognitive Search, if you are familiar. That tool itself has a free tier. So again, if your data is small enough, you can again just have it sit there. That's where it's anchored on your data itself. So that's the vector database in the cloud that you'll use. In the free tier, you have a maximum indexes, you have maximum storage. But again, it costs you $0 a month. So that's the closest thing to memory you'd potentially have. You can then also build out memory stores if you want to. So if you have past messages, we'll look at some API calls to Azure OpenAI. You can basically feed as many as you want into there. So if you build a UI that supports multiple messages, you can do that. Just the more messages you have, the more tokens you're going to have every request you make thereon. Because even if I ask you just like, what's 2 + 2, what's 3 + 3, if I keep piping the answer and the previous questions back into the model every time I ask it, you're going to start increasing your token usage just because it's going to have to go back and quote unquote remember what it just gave you. So as your historical messages get longer, you're going to pay more for tokens. In the chat playground, when you play with the model, there is a, to remember where to get to it. Oh, there is a toggle. Oh yeah, right here. So past messages include, you can go up to 20 in just the studio. So you have an up to 20 messages on the history. Once you get too many, again, it starts costing you more and more tokens. You're paying more and more for simple questions potentially. So it's beneficial to you when you can to purge past messages, but that would be something on your end to decide, is this a message worth saving? Do I even need memory? Do I want memory? That kind of stuff. Yeah. Mhm. I haven't seen anything too crazy. The models themselves seem to take the longest in that whole chain. So as the models get better, the speed of retrieval gets better. So like O1 was pretty terrible. I think it almost always took 10 seconds, regardless of it had the answer or not. That was one thing that OpenAI announced as a fix for during their December announcements. You could go down that path. There are integrations for Azure AI Search to just natively connect to structured data stores like Azure SQL. So you could just do that if you could get to that point and have structured, like basically if you have structured authoring already, you could do that, index it, start asking more specific queries. It really just depends on what you're trying to do with your AI. For example, one thing we've started doing is recording what people are asking for, because the client I'm at wants to get to structured authoring. And they also know there's a high degree of variance between each article. So like how they wrote stuff 10 years ago versus now, even just different editors and different writers, everything comes out with slightly different variation. So one goal of theirs is to get to standardization and do all that. All let's say, if you have structured data, if you can get it into a structured format, that can work, that can be helpful. It might save you a little bit on the storage potentially, because then you're only indexing exactly what you need. You know, you don't really need to have overlap because you can say with confidence, hey, this is a distinct section than this. I don't have to use this extra space or the context windows to have that overlap because I know I don't need the next part of the PDF, for example. I know everything that's relevant to this part is now right here in this one column. But for speed of retrieval and all that, I haven't seen a huge difference. It's mostly the model that takes the longest. When we've checked it, it's the Azure OpenAI trying to take whatever you had, think about it, and get back to you takes longer than whatever the connection to AI search itself does. Yeah. Any other questions?
So I get where this layers over HR.
Mhm.
Basically, that's what.
Mhm.
What it is, so I'm gonna say I'm joking that I'm construction. Is it all there or generally better off using things like Power BI, profile, those kinds of things?
It's a good question. It depends on what exactly you're trying to do with it. What I'd like to, so regardless of that example, you probably have two different indexes, right? So you'd have an index for your unstructured data and an index for your structured data. For multiple reasons, you have your security, data security and data segregation. Probably don't want one chatbot that can get all that data for everybody. The other thing is you can get things when you start talking about code interpreter. That's kind of cool, where you probably can get this from Power BI, but that's potentially another license of just saying like, hey, go get me, let's pretend like it's HR data. Like, hey, tell me how many days off has Alec had in the last 6 months? Tell me what his average performance review is. Tell me, some data or metric we have. And then code interpreter, what it can actually do is write the code to basically do that query. And then you can also give it access to execute the code itself too. Yeah, so, and then they started announcing, I forget the name of it, but there's basically isolated Docker instances you can run in Azure Container Apps. So it just has the bare minimum it needs to execute like Python, for example. And that was one of their things they announced at, I think it was Ignite. So that they're starting to build out more of a runway to, if you want those autonomous tasks. Where that saves you money is Power BI is I'm going to guess, I think it's like $30 a month per person. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Well, in this option, if you do it a pure consumption-based model, you're paying only when you run the query. So as long as it's under whatever you're paying there, or if it's like, if it's something you can schedule as well, you get 50% cost savings on all AI models too. So if it's like you're doing a bunch of reports, cool, I'm going to send the model, tell it to go fetch it, and it can do some dynamic things. And then if it creates stuff you like, throw it on an Azure function, then it's free pretty much because you get like 1 million invocations for free. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we're in a weird time right now too, right? Because so there was one thing I was talking to people about of we were going to build out a data discovery tool. Didn't realize this at the time, but so our client has some data scientist people. Their main objective right now is moving everything into Databricks. Databricks is great. They have a lot of their own search capabilities. If you want to search your data sets, all that, awesome. My client also has, what was it? I think it's one Power BI report for every 2 employees they have on staff right now. So you can't tell me that there's some out there that aren't being used. There has to be some out there that are just duplicates because maybe Alec made a copy and now John left and he had the exact same thing and now it's just kind of out there. But then Stacy was like, oh, I want John's copy. And, then you get this thing we have for every 2 employees, we have a Power BI report. So we're going to start building out a data discovery system. Learned that they're starting to use Microsoft Purview on a different initiative for data governance, but it's also there for data discovery. And they're like, Purview search right now kind of sucks. Because that's where Power BI kind of falls off, or Databricks falls off, right? They're great in their ecosystems. What if I'm just a normal person, not even a developer, maybe I am, but I just want this data. I don't really care where it comes from. I just need it for some reason. Or maybe I need to know the database, or if I can get that through a Power BI report, if I can get it through a stored proc, if I can get it, I don't care. Or if I'm an end user, right? Maybe I'm just running a report. I can just get that. So they're like, man, this would be really great. Somebody even said on the call, this would be really great until Microsoft announces Copilot for Purview. And then we searched it. Copilot for Purview's in early preview, early access preview version. And I think it's a small user group right now. But so it's like, we made the joke that Microsoft is going to build something better than we could ever build. And it's in preview. We don't know how long it's going to be from preview to here. Is it worth our time building something that's going to objectively be worse? So we decided not to. Right. We'll just get all the beta users through. They'll like it. They'll love it. And then Microsoft will be like, hey, here's a free tool that does everything you can do and better. So yeah. So that's where we were like, the only thing we kind of thought about at that point is, I'm not super familiar with Purview, but we use Swagger spec for just about everything. So open API spec. Could we maybe build a directory that scanned all those and then said like, all right, here's the Purview part of this. Here's the API part of this. So we could build like a unification. But then it was like, I feel like we're splitting a hair of a hair here. Really, people don't want to, like if they can find the data source, they probably can reverse engineer their way back to an API if we have it. And that's kind of where we got to. It was just like, it's not super worth our time to do that. And at the rate, like the SharePoint indexing, right, with Copilot itself, they've told our client that it's not the best and they're working on it, but it's like, okay, at what point is it going to be good enough that like you don't want to build an indexing of your SharePoint? Like it's good enough for that right now that you're going to get 80-90% of the way there. What I've been telling people is what is the one use case that you really need to focus on? And for example, one company we were talking to has a bunch of legal information and they send out a bunch of different documents. And the lawyers are like, man, I just sent this out. I swear it was only a week ago. If I found this exact verbiage, I can just copy and paste it. SharePoint search does not do that. It won't go inside the files themselves. That's where a Copilot search is better because they say, okay, here's the phrase I found or similar. It doesn't also have to be an exact keyword. Here's the files we think it's in. One thing where it could be if you build that middle ground solution, if you have tech people, you could potentially get out of that $30 a month fixed. I think they usually like annual commitments to a Copilot. You can start gathering usage metrics. So like when somebody comes to you and says, hey, it'd be real great if we could do this. Okay, cool. Are you going to use that every day, every month, every week? Like what? Let's justify that cost. That's where building a solution, using off the shelf to build kind of that middle solution can kind of help because then you can actually get user metrics to say, okay, well, if we're paying Azure, say for easy math, we have 10 employees. If we're paying Azure more than $300 a month, we know it's cheaper to go the Copilot route because we're going to save money just buying that license. Doesn't really matter, if we have heavy users or not. We just know mathematically, hey, Copilot's cost for 10 people is $300 a month. If our Azure cost gets higher than that, cool. We then know it's there. Or starting to justify, hey, it actually solves our problem. Because there's other things where if you're searching documents, if your documents aren't structured very well, it might still be hard to find stuff. So some people also want to see the proof of if we build a solution or if we buy something from Microsoft, how do we know it's actually going to find the stuff? Because everybody's kind of hesitant now, especially with the AI hype train of, are you selling me, rainbows and puppies and none of that's going to come once I sign the check? Or are you selling me something that actually works and that I can maintain and run? Oh, for sure. One thing that we can roll into that I think is fun. Let's see. If you ask me how this works, I don't 100% understand all the pieces. So I'm going to give you that caveat because I'm learning just as well as a lot of you. So if you haven't played with semantic kernel, it's pretty fun. And by that, I mean extremely frustrating. But when it works, it freaks you out. So if you haven't heard of semantic kernel, the idea behind it is it gonna, don't they have a quick start? Yeah, there it is. So the idea is that they want to kind of help you build and orchestrate I went back too far. All of your AI models. So the idea is that your code can run here. You can have hooks and filters or plugins, and those can interact with the latest models. It's kind of like a level of abstraction so that you can then build out these things and new models can drop without necessarily breaking your stuff. But it does some crazy magic that I think is really cool. For example, yeah, and then this is kind of how it flows, right? Your app will make a request to semantic kernel. It has plugins, which can basically be snippets of code. It can be some AI magic. It can be different things. So for example, we talk about agents. You could build potentially a business logic flow of maybe a semantic kernel, because then say, hey, with the request you gave me, I know I need to run this flow. I'm going to do that. You get kind of the benefit of AI, but also the benefit of deterministic code. So you can kind of get both of those. We'll kind of show that off here, mostly because I just figured this out the other day. I run .NET? I did not. So we're going to run .NET new console, which will give me a new console app. I'm also using Cursor's IDE. If you are curious, it's kind of interesting. The AI, I feel like, is a lot better than Copilot if you've used Copilot. But Copilot is very quickly closing the gap. And then they also have this cool little, that's not the button I was looking for. Copilot stole this from them, this composer window. So you can ask it different questions and things about the code you're looking at. So it can help you like refactor code. It can tell you what different code blocks do, all that sort of fun jazz. So I now have a Hello World application. I'm going to do this. All right, let's go grab. I'm going to test to make sure that the model they deployed for us actually works. It does. So I don't know what that was giving us so much grief for, but I need the endpoint. I need the key. And then it called it, what did it call it? It just, no, it's just chat. Okay. All right. So what you can do then is we can define different plugins that we want the AI model to interact with. So in their sample, they have, here it is. They have a lights plugin. So we'll create that. New file. Is that in there? So what it does is, let's make sure, there we go. Now we're imported. What that does is, if you notice, we can have different lights. They define a few ones just for example here. So they have a table lamp, they have a porch light, they have a chandelier. There is a kernel function. So this is how you define methods in semantic kernel. You can give it a name. Let's see if I can. Oh, come on. When I'm programming at home, I accidentally zoom in, and now when I want to, I can't. Oh well. Let's see, window zoom. That's an interesting way to zoom. Anyway, are you guys able to see that in the back? Cool. And then we have change light state. So we have that name, and then we have the changes the state of the light. So if I go to the terminal, do .NET run. Oh, you know .NET. Oh, it helps if I spelled it right. So I can say, please toggle. I'm gonna keep the extra O in there just for fun. Here, got a 403 trying to authenticate. What is going on here? Azure OpenAI chat completions. Oh, I don't think that's the right endpoints. Is it? Does it need this maybe? This gets real bad. We can pull up Writer and start. Key-based authentic. Oh, okay. That makes sense. So I got an error that key-based authentication is turned off for this resource, which I didn't know was something. Okay, that is probably the issue we had earlier. Let's pivot, use a different. Assuming what happened is that bicep script was trying to dump keys and then it had that turned off. Let's change this to that. This model's name is GPT-4. And this key is. I'll rotate these keys after this call. So I'm trying to get my keys to run stuff. Sorry. All right, and then if you notice, the assistant actually went out and did our toggle function. It changed the states of the two files. Oh, and it lets me zoom in now. I'm still getting used to this. So now it flipped them on. So if we look at the original state that was created, it went false, false, true. Now it's true, true, false, essentially. And it changed it to turned on, turned off, all of that. So it interpreted that we were turning it on and turning it off, even though I didn't explicitly tell it to. One thing that's really fun about this is if we do, oh shoot, rename. Steal this from my notes. This is from Google. They have an old version of semantic kernel, so this is just something I cleaned up. But what we can actually do is say, hey, I'm now going to give you the power to make CRUD requests. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So we can tell it to do GET requests, posts, all that sort of fun stuff. Where I think this is really exciting and kind of scary when we talk about the magic. This is just a fun API that I know is out there. So there's the Chuck Norris joke API. So if you ever need to make just a simple CRUD app that can make API calls, it's a good one to use. I've also seen there's a Pokemon one out there too. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say kernel plugins, add from type. And then we just added the HTTP client. What I'm going to do is now rerun the app. Only one application constructor. Sorry. Maybe. No, looks like it's only in there once. Oh, is it because, do I have an H? I don't think I have it defined over here, do I? I don't think so. That's gonna make a liar out of me. Should only be one application constructor. No plugins that add. Let's see. Smart enough to help me. That did not. It did what I wanted it to do. See if that fixed everything. Probably didn't, because it usually doesn't. Oh, maybe it did. Sweet. So I'm gonna say, can you get me a joke from? And then Chuck Norris doesn't just bend space-time, he can turn it into a goddamn ballooning. So you can pass it different things like that. If you notice too, the other thing that's cool is there's actually a JSON object tied to this. So I actually didn't need to give my semantic kernel any sort of context of what kind of JSON it was getting back. It was able to figure that out and parse it out itself. So if you notice here, it said, here's a joke for you. And it completely parsed that JSON without me having to go to C#, build out that object, do all that sort of work. And I think this is where some of the AI magic gets a little scary because it's like, what is it doing behind the scenes? How do I always replicate that? What if I have a complex object? Like how crazy of an object can I get before it falls over on itself, basically? One thing I'm trying to build out right now is we have a blob table where we're collecting all the feedback for people using our AI tool. Can I start saying, hey, go out to blob and just give me the last 7 days of data, and then do like a sentiment analysis? Like, is it positive, negative, or indifferent? Because we also capture like that 3 levels of feedback. Yeah, and that comes back as a very big, I believe it's a XML OData format. So that's what I'm working on now, just to see, hey, can we parse this weird form of data that's XML and get responses back with ultimately, hopefully, there's a product manager, like any job, who wants that data every week. Instead of me having to run it or go, copy and paste the last 7 days of data, can I just put something out there on some sort of cron or some sort of scheduler just for, no, I could probably write a SQL query or some sort of query to get the last 7 days, but it's kind of the fun of AI now of, can I just schedule a job for future things? So we then have a roadmap of the next scheduled job or the next thing we need to do. We have a working example to point to and say, hey, cool, let's grab it and go. And then it's also able to be flexible too. So we could potentially ask it more in-depth questions. For example, we have content filtering on for like hate speech, violence, all that sort of stuff. But there's also some words that we maybe don't want them to be using. So we could also potentially ask AI, hey, have you seen any of those? It could potentially abstract away, for example, like we talked about the surveys from HR that you could get. It could potentially abstract it away. So even if HR is collecting the data to see, like, did Alec fill it out? Somewhere that's data is probably tied to me. you could abstract it away even further to just ask the model like, hey, what's some general sentiment at the company? What's morale looking like? And then it could hide potentially who said what from people. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I have going on. I tried to use AutoGen in .NET 8 and it blew up on me. It looks like there's an issue with an Azure, with an OpenAI library that they said they were fixing the sample yesterday. So I haven't gone back to play with it yet, but that was the next thing I was going to go to. But yeah, if you want to give me a follow on LinkedIn, subscribe to my newsletter. I do have 2-factor subscription just because of the company I use. So expect an email that says, did you actually mean to subscribe to this? And then you have to hit a confirm again because 2-factor opt-in is standard in some countries. So the service I use for that does that. But yeah, any questions?
The class is sitting on. And really interesting about it is often and some other YouTube research work. I was listening to data. But the book is very quickly. We have to easily. Anyway, I think what the name of your the Scott suing on. Yeah. 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 He's the head of Microsoft. Yeah, not too long. And there's about a 2-month issue that with the person. It's interesting that.
Yeah, that's a good plug. I'll check it out. We've even seen since we started doing it, my computer's about to die. So if you're online, sorry. We've seen even using 3.5 turbo compared to 4.0 mini. We used to be talking like, I think it was like 25, 50 cents a query. Now we're down to like, I think we can get 100 questions answered for $1. Like the exponential decrease, because that was the one thing people kept talking about was, are models doing kind of the Uber method of subsidizing your rides and your services to make it seem cheap, but they keep falling at such a rate that it doesn't seem like they are.
The other thing, since you come up with something 6 months today.
Mhm.
It was interesting that.
Yeah. Well, and there's even if you want your own chat GPT, right, you can throw it up in Azure OpenAI and they have open source frameworks for just building out your own chat GPT interface, like throwing up your own data, throwing up your own stuff. Like you can basically get that UI for free. Microsoft then holds all your data, so you know it's secure, it's safe, private. You now have your own internal chat GPT and it took you no time at all. Like deploying an Azure OpenAI instance takes about, used to take 10 minutes before the models are ready. And then you just use an open source library, plug in your keys, and good to go. It's crazy. Mhm.
Something that they would be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really good person stuff. So, you know, other reason how people have gone as well and she has that is AI going to take my job of this, so should I be able to this remind you of we had one of the speakers last year at this program, and he said AI is not going to take person who knows AI is going to. So I think the next wave.
And if you think about it, we have to do it. So.
I mean, and then what people are forgetting is to enable AI to the power that now brings.
Mhm.
We want to exist in the powers.
The other thing that's interesting, gap in healthcare is something. Where there's tremendous potential for AI in healthcare, what people are appreciating is still got to have something.
Yeah.
So you still have resources.
I mean, you think a lot about AI in this spot that very hard. Say AI is always AI can never take it. So like create it will never be original created. It will always reduce the from the data that by but AI can never be emotional. It's a quality that people can AI. I think those are the things which will all be expert response that
Mhm.
I'll go back to the kind of the insurance for buying loud. The internet was starting to get big. CEO, it's all bigger, selling this insurance on the internet at the time, our market was huge car dealers, that kind of thing. And we looked at each other and said, okay, but the internet could pick the guy up, driving down the street, trying to buy him some beers. Then we got a challenge. So there's still a need for that.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in high school, we had a gentleman, a robot, Alec robot. He was of the opinion that the next coming decade, robots are going to take over our world. That will be done and then
That's one of the things with the site.
Mhm.
Create dash pound. Create dash pound. And the upper left, click on the second red box. Just an FYI, we're running the US Open Robotics, 400 teams, probably 46, 2,000 kids, 2 weeks, Mid-America Center, high school, middle school kids, which is a real neat program. But it's amazing what some of these kids.
Mhm.
It's a really cool event. Trees, big fire, these competitive kids that are just in this kind of stuff.
they have students 6 years.
Yeah, it just started learning. But yeah, it's a cool event. And as I said, we ended up buying some, so
Yeah.
we had 25,000.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, something's come up. It's fun.
Yeah. I think kind of your point, Vibob, like I posted my question or my problem in my prompt here in Cursor and I just hit apply all to all the files and my stuff works now. It's like you might not get AI 100% or be able to replace people, but even just if I would have pasted that in, went to Stack Overflow, like all those things get me more and more out of the flow versus I can just paste it here, not ever leave my IDE, and now I'm, done with what I'm doing. It's really crazy too. You talked about killing COBOL, just seeing if you're trying to bring up a legacy system, what kind of unit tests do I need? What kind of all these things, and it can just auto generate. I was just working on something we built in JavaScript, or it was in Angular, and I was just like typing out, my good old just test of given the description, it do the test, and it would autocomplete most of the test. And it was the first time I was like, man, this is like 80% what I want. Just by the title of the test, it knew what I was trying to test. It generated fake data, mocked it. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, took me no time where I was using Writer in the back end and I was like writing all my tests, doing all the boilerplate, like, oh. But on the front, I was just like, tap, 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 done, PR, like, we're good to go. So I think,
Someone said that.
Mhm. Yeah, cool.
Well, thanks, Alec.
Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna get off the call.
Probably voting on